Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our July Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness Meetup call. If you have not been here before, welcome. I loved seeing the chat. That was amazing to see people. I can't believe how international this group is and has become. And I just discovered that one of my oldest friends who lives in Quebec, in Canada, whose maple syrup I had this morning, is here on this call for the first time. So Lisa, I'm glad you're here. And just really happy to welcome you all here. I want to talk about the purpose of these calls for a moment. So it's twofold. The main purpose of these calls is to support you all in offering contemplative practice in a trauma-sensitive way. So for those of you that don't know me as well, my work is really around training people around this unique intersection of mindfulness, meditation, and trauma. And really to say inside of that, what are the best practices that we can be in, from the environment that we create to the modifications that we're offering to how we respond to people in the moment who are struggling with trauma. That's really been my focus. So this community, especially if you're new to it, is predominantly people who are offering practices. This could be contemplative teachers, yoga teachers. There's a lot of coaches or therapists who are offering mindfulness and body-based practices. And there's also practitioners here inside the community who are interested in this topic. So wherever you're coming from, you're completely welcome here. We try to have these calls be, really open, relaxed, casual, where we're getting to share our best thinking with each other. So, just a second purpose I want to bring here is, for me personally, this is a chance to get to meet you all. And it's a chance for me to really touch into the community and say, what's alive for the group? Where are you feeling strong and succeeding around trauma-informed practice? Where are you running into particular challenges? And what's of interest to you? And the trauma-sensitive practice that I learned really comes out of feminist and domestic violence organizing in the 70s and 80s that was really grassroots, practical, where we're learning from each other. So I'm here with this call. I'm here to hold a container and offer everything I can, and also to open it up. There's a ton of wisdom inside this community that I'm excited to lift up, and today will be a day where we'll have the chance to do that. So the topic today is around trauma-sensitive Zoom calls, or when we're working online. So many of us have shifted to being online with COVID. You're holding space for others. And then this question inevitably comes up, like, how can I work with people who are struggling with trauma? We did part one of this call in May. I think we probably had 200 or 300 people on that call. It was so alive. And based on the emails that I've seen from you all, you said we'd like to take a second pass at this. So I'm going to briefly cover what I talked about on the May call, but you're welcome to go back and watch that. You'll get a link to that. And then I'll talk about some of the other things that I've learned the last couple months in terms of best practices, and then really open it up to all of you. We want to hear what questions you're in, what's working for you well, and then just really get to take the wisdom here from the community and share it with each other. So on that note, I have someone joining me today. His name's Tyler Grillo, and he's one of the people. We have a small little team, and he works behind the scenes here. And he's been someone who we've had our heads together the last couple months around Zoom and how to offer workshops like this and practices in a trauma-sensitive way. And so he'll have his own suggestions here. We've been in this together. And he also does a lot of powerful anti-racist organizing here in the Bay Area and just brings a strong systemic analysis to work around trauma-sensitive practice. So I thought it'd be awesome if he's here. Tyler, are you here? And if you're here, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very glad to be with you, and grateful for this opportunity to share my learnings, any learnings here that would be useful to you all. See some familiar faces here. Really great to see you. And yeah, looking forward to digging into this conversation. So thanks, David.
Thanks, Tyler. Tyler also has some amazing cats, which you might see wandering around, hopefully. Let me talk through the logistics then of the call, the structure. So the call's an hour. And if you're able to be on video, that's great. Encourage that. It's just helpful for us to see each other's faces, people from all over the world. And if you can't be, that's also fine. We know there's folks that are listening that or prefer not to be on video. And then in terms of the schedule, so I'm going to open with a practice, and then I'll have some opening comments. I just want to say a couple things, connecting some dots around trauma, COVID, and then this huge pivot that so many are making around working online. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So there'll be Q&A, or it could also just be comments like what's working for you, what's been challenging. I'm not going to be monitoring the chat, but Tyler will be. And so I might turn it back over to Tyler a couple times and say, hey, Tyler, what are you seeing, or what do you want to lift up here? And then we'll do a hand raising function for those of you that want to come on live and have a discussion with me. If you click the participants tab, I think on the bottom right is where you can raise your hand. So there'll be a couple times, second half of the call, where there'll be time for you to come on live if you like. And then finally, we've been offering breakout rooms. Some of you will know these breakout rooms where you can be in smaller groups of 4 or 5. These are totally optional, and this will be at the end of the call. So at the top of the hour, 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. Pacific, you'll have the opportunity to meet with a couple people. That'll be randomly set up because of the number here. But if you'd like to hang around and meet with, say, 4 or 5 other people in a breakout room to talk about how's your work going, what are you learning about trauma, what do you see in this community, please stick around. We've had some people, we've been doing that consistently for the last year, and people seem to enjoy the connections that they've been making. So that'll be an option at the end if you want to hang around after the call for the breakout rooms. Okay, well, let me lead us through just a light trauma-sensitive practice here to get us started. This will be about 4 or 5 minutes max. And just to mention, some people have been noticing feel more comfortable during meditations if they want to have their camera off, just for a sense of more privacy, especially if you have your eyes closed. That's an option for you as well. But just let yourself find a posture that works for you here. It could be seated, it could also be standing or lying down. And just know if at any point during this practice you feel agitated or activated in a way that has you feel overwhelmed, you can always shift inside of that. Otherwise, just taking a few moments here to really just settle yourself in a posture that's inviting relaxation, but also some alertness. And the invitation here to begin is just to take a couple of deeper breaths to help you arrive. A deeper inhalation, and then a slow and gentle exhalation. Maybe one more deeper inhale, filling the lungs, and then a slow and a smooth exhale. And here, just noticing the quality of presence that's here right now. You might be more focused, feeling more distracted, but just to begin noticing what's here. I also invite you to orient to your surrounding environment, noticing what's around you as a way to invite yourself into the present. So that could be through sound, for example, noticing the soundscape. What you hear in your environment could also be sight, if that's accessible to you. Just taking a moment to really take in your surroundings, letting the nervous system really imprint in the present moment. And then taking a moment to notice what's here right now in terms of your own experience, whether that's physical in terms of sensations that are predominant, or it could be a mood that's here right now, or any narratives that are here. And as best you can, just making room for that, whatever you're noticing, recognizing it. You might explore labeling whatever is here right now. If sensations, it might be tingling, warmth, or coolness. Could be labeling a mood like contentment or anxiety, or labeling thoughts. And again, just as a way to support your presence here right now, recognizing what's here. And as best you can, just allowing that to be here, whatever is here, that there's some agreement with the experience as best as you can. And the invitation is to extend some care to yourself inside of this moment. So many here are holding people through a lot of adversity. So just taking a moment to extend yourself some care in this moment. Could be through a gesture, like the hands on the heart, or some gentle contact. It could also be through words like a simple prompt, like, well, what do I need to hear right now? What will support me? Any gesture of care. And then in these final moments of the practice, just letting go of any doing. So again, coming back to that quality of presence that's here. And seeing if you can relax back into that, resting there. And finally, if there's any people or groups or communities that you'd like to extend this care to in this moment, taking a moment to do that as well. Holding these people in your heart, in your care, and extending them some care as well. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So, as I mentioned, I'd like to just open here with a couple of thoughts about this moment, continue, and really just to offer some scaffolding and a frame as we move towards this very practical and important conversation about best trauma sensitive practices when it comes to Zoom. I've been saying on a couple calls that I've been on that in the, I'd say like 15 years that I've been studying this topic around mindfulness and trauma, that this is by far the most relevant that both mindfulness and trauma have seemed to have been. Given COVID, given movements for racial justice right now, there's just so much up in the larger social systems talking about mindfulness and attention and meditation, contemplative practice, and then trauma. And I'd say there's an increasing awareness. This is why I appreciate this community so much. Appreciating how much mindfulness can offer right now in terms of helping people stay awake, helping people stay resourced and connected to the present moment, and all that is possible inside of mindfulness, meditation, and contemplative practices. And then inside of that, and this is where I've been definitely feel like I have my finger on the pulse of this, more and more people are starting to make connections with trauma and the importance of any kind of contemplative practice being offered in a trauma-informed way. Basically, what that means is, if you're newer to this, would be that in anything that we're offering, any teachings and practices, that we're sensitive to the needs of people who are struggling with trauma. That doesn't mean, as we could talk about more, that we're necessarily walking on eggshells as providers or that we need to be overly careful. It's just having a grounded confidence that if someone came to us and said, hey, I'm really struggling with trauma inside of my practice, that you'd know how to respond effectively and that you'd have some best practices to offer people. And that it's almost like, I think of it through glasses, that when you're thinking about the practices that you're offering, you're thinking about it through the lens of trauma. What would people struggling with traumatic symptoms need to be safe and supported inside their practice? And I've been reflecting a lot, of course, on COVID and how we can all respond most effectively to people that we're offering practices to. And there's a term that I wanted to put on the table here as we move towards the best Zoom practices, and that's global high intensity activation. And this might be something that some of you have heard of, but I thought it'd be useful to just name it to continue just building some scaffolding around how to think about trauma in a moment of COVID. So, global high intensity activation comes from somatic experiencing, which is a psychotherapeutic approach to trauma healing. And definition of global high intensity activation is a state of sustained high stress that occurs when the body is flooded with sensations and or emotions that are overwhelming and difficult, and if not impossible to escape from. Common symptoms include intense and pervasive emotional and physical dysregulation, limited resiliency with regards to stress, and the tendency to be hyper aroused, meaning this kind of our nervous system is on all the time, it's hard to turn it off, or hypo aroused, meaning that we're almost fully off. It's hard to find any kind of middle range. Sometimes this is talked about as a window of tolerance, that it's really hard to occupy our window of tolerance. And I'm sharing this here for two reasons, and I'm happy to talk about it more in our discussion if you like. But one is to remind us, as if, I mean, many of us won't need reminding, that I don't think we can underestimate the adversity and trauma that people are facing, especially as the virus continues on. I mean, here in the US, I see we have a really international audience right now, but here in the US, it's a particularly challenging moment as there was a lot of sacrifice made months earlier, and then still we have cases really spiking heavily right now. So there's this feeling of kind of unending distress. And I wanted to remind us of the potentially traumatic impact of that. And in particular, I wanted to highlight second, just the really unique and intense impact of inescapability with regards to trauma. And this is happening to so many people and families and communities right now in a sustained way. And in my, conversations, webinars that I'm leading, just the conversations I'm having with people who are doing this work, the sustained stress over time is really starting to wear on people. And I know this is absolutely not new for communities that are targeted by oppression, given this level of sustained stress and heightened activation. And this feels like a high watermark right now in terms of just the collective stress and adversity that people are facing. So this has been, I've been coming back to this term that I learned about 10 years ago inside of somatic experiencing, global high intensity activation. And I thought that I just want to put that on the table as reminding us what's happening right now for so many people. So for that reason, and again, why I believe so many of you would be here in this moment is to talk about, well, how then can we offer mindfulness practices and do so in a trauma sensitive way? So I want to pivot here to then talking about best online practices. And the majority of us from the conversations I've had on these meetups, now we've really made this big pivot and we're in this just unique and challenging experiment that comes with a lot of opening and possibility, but also a lot of particular challenges. And the question I want to hone in here on for the rest of this call is, how can we do well? How can we do well by the individuals that we're working with, the groups that we're leading? And how can we in particular leverage the benefits of being able to reach more and more people online for those that are privileged enough to have access while working with these challenges, and especially particularly as it relates to trauma. So a couple months ago on the May meetup, I imagine that there were many of you here. I see your faces. So I covered basically maybe 10 best practices or suggestions, and I'm not going to cover them in detail here just for the people that were here, but for those of you that are newer and that you want to review them, I'm going to show you the just a handout that we have. Tyler might be able to share this file with you in the chat as I show you here. But here's a list that we have. You're welcome to screenshot this if you want. We will also be providing you this list if you're on the community list. This will be something that you can download and access. Again, Tyler might try sharing it into the chat. But these are I just want to name at a high level some of the things that we covered in the May call, and then I'll pivot and talk about a couple of the additional things that I'm seeing, learning, and I'm looking at right now. So first was the importance of setting a solid container and a clear container. And there's a number of things we can do here. I mean, in trauma sensitive work, given that choice is so often taken away for someone struggling with trauma, either in a moment of traumatic stress or in an ongoing way with traumatic symptoms, the more that we can do kind of front end work to let people know, here's what we're offering, here's what I can and can't offer, here's the scope of the group or the session, here's what we'll be up to, here's how long the call will be, the more predictable that the container is for people, the more that it invites them to feel safe, trusting, and often to do, I think, deeper work, whether the contemplative work or not. So a couple thoughts were having clear information about a session or a Zoom call ahead of time, sharing the purpose of the call, both on email and also at the beginning of the call, having any agreements in place that could be confidentiality or asking people to be self-responsive. I think leading with some kind of grounding meditation can be helpful in regulating for people, and also some kind of monitoring or mood check, which we'll talk more about. But I mean, we can't do it here with this many people, but being able to just get a sense of how the group is doing is really useful. And we talked about chatting in mood on the chat box or doing a brief mood check. There's different ways we can do that. And then at some point, we get to a point where we can't hold it with the size of the group. The second down below here is offering choice. This is core inside of trauma sensitive practice generally. On Zoom, a couple options are giving people options around video. As I said, like I made the request, hey, if you can be here with your face on video, it's great to see you. And if that's not available, don't worry about it. So making clear requests of the container that we want to set up. And also breakout rooms, offering options around breakout rooms, and I'll be saying more about that in a moment. And then the top right here, we have, I just talked about general best practices. There's security. It's one reason I wanted Tyler here. We have been in an ongoing conversation about, as you might have seen, there's been instances where there's been security breaches inside of Zoom calls, including inside of mindfulness and meditation groups, where people come on, I think they call it Zoom bombing, which is a terrible term, but people coming on and disrupting a call and showing graphic images. So to have your security dialed in is pretty useful and important. So getting in the back end of whatever online platform that you're on, taking a moment to actually see the settings and deciding for you what's the security that you want to hold. This is an example for us here. When I post this on social media, I'm not a big social media person, but when I do put it out there, one tip that we've heard is don't put your Zoom addresses publicly online, because that's inviting more potentially some mischief happening. So that's why we do the emails directly to you. A second facilitator, if possible, is really helpful. As we talked about, that's why I have Tyler here right now. I can't track to the degree, because I'm trying to pay attention to what I'm presenting to you all. Having someone, if possible, who's monitoring the chat, who could see if anything's opening up that needs attention, can be really useful. I know that's not possible for all of us, but just mentioning it. Emoticons, we have, here on Zoom, we now have the different reactions that we have. I see there's still only 2, but that can be very useful for people to be communicating non-verbally and to create a sense of belonging. And then finally, accounting for compliance, just really briefly on this, just remembering that we're in a position of power and authority, and that people who we're training or working with will tend to defer to our authority. So just working with that power differential and knowing that that's there when we make requests of people. Finally, optimizing breakout rooms. So reminding people that they can call for help. When you're in a breakout room, you can actually press a button that calls for one of the hosts to come to the room if they need any assistance. So a reminder about that, reminding people always that they're in choice for breakout rooms, it's an option for them. And then finally, we talked about in May, assessing the overall capacity of the group and asking the question, will having breakout rooms be actually supportive of this group, or might it be more activating? So if you're going to, in a mandatory way, place people into breakout rooms and you're having a really intensive conversation about differences of identity, that can be really evocative for people. And so just know, whatever you're asking, that for someone who's struggling with trauma to suddenly be placed in a breakout room with strangers or people they don't know, it can be highly activating. The more choice that we can build in there and assess the capacity of the group for whether it will support or hinder, the better. So for this example, I leave it completely in choice for you all about breakout rooms. And we can talk more about breakout rooms, but I think that's one of the places that a lot of us are having questions about trauma sensitive practice. So again, this slide, I can't see if it came through in the chat, but you will have access to this. And then let me spend about 7 minutes here on the additions that I wanted to make and a couple different examples. And then we're going to open it up. So again, if you have comments or questions that you would like to address here in the community, you're welcome to chat into the box. Tyler will be monitoring that. And then in about, say 7-10 minutes, I'll be opening it up. So if you'd like to raise your hand, we can go online here. Or you can come on live with me if you like. Okay, so a couple of things that I'm learning, just to be transparent, and why Tyler's here as well. One is just to prepare for the unexpected. I'm finding that Zoom calls become more regulating for me, or I'm more regulated if I just move into a Zoom call with the expectation that something unexpected will happen. It's like not to be surprised if and when there is an issue with technology, or not to be surprised given this particular moment around COVID if something really opens up inside of the chat, or if someone comes on live and is having a strong emotional response, to just not be surprised around that. So I'm not surprised anymore when there's a conversation around trauma, around social justice, and to be as prepared as possible for the unexpected. I wanted to mention that up front. It's a general attitude that I'd say moving in. Second, and on that note, is I encourage us all to have some follow-up protocol if we are doing live Zoom groups or any kind of online video groups with people. Do you have protocols in place for if someone, for example, said that they were experiencing a lot of difficulty inside, they were just highly dysregulated, and by virtue of a practice that you were leading? Or maybe if you had a really difficult back and forth with someone online, do you have any kind of follow-up protocols in place? In terms of what we have an email that we will write people if they were to write in and let them know, like, here's some different resources. I'll be talking about resources you can offer people. And then we just have a protocol where I always check in with the person that I'm leading a call with at the end to say, is there anything that we need to follow up on? Any people that we should look at? I always go back to the chat. I read through the chat and I see if there's anyone that I should follow up with. But just inviting us to have some kind of protocols in place that we've thought about it, so that we're not surprised if at the end of a session we need to have some kind of follow-up protocol. The third here is security. Oh, I already mentioned that around security. So just a reminder, how would you handle it if there was some kind of security breach? So if someone's on there that you hadn't invited into your community, they're sharing their screen, what do you have in place? Do you know that would you close the call and end right there? Would you actually see if you could, there's different ways that you can actually mute someone or actually have them leave the call. There's different ways that you can work with this. But again, I think being prepared and thinking about how you'd handle it if there was some kind of security breach is useful. And then similar and along these lines is participant disclosure. What are you prepared if someone is to disclose something privately on chat to you that requires some kind of follow-up? So sometimes there might be public sharing that people are sharing some adversity and trauma, but it can also happen privately, and this has happened to us, where someone says, I'm actively experiencing trauma, I need support here. Do you have protocols in place if there's some kind of disclosure that happens inside the chat? On that note, I feel like it's an important time for everyone to be trained in offering a basic suicide assessment. And some of you will know this, but for those of you that aren't as familiar, there is a 5-point suicide assessment plan that's very well known about identifying risk factors and protective factors that are in place. This comes from SAMHSA and is available online. And I'm going to chat this into the box right now. This is the link. Here we go. That's the link for this protocol. But I think it can be very useful for us to all know at a very basic degree what are the questions that we can ask if someone reveals that they're suicidal. For example, not supporting their disclosure. So if someone says to me, I've been thinking about killing myself, that to actually say back to them, to acknowledge that they've taken that risk and to affirm that they've taken the risk of telling you. And then there are some protocols that we can learn, again, about learning what's happening. Do they have means in their surrounding environment? Do we need to actively call 911? We don't need to be necessarily a trained mental health professional to actually have some protocol in place and be able to make that assessment. So I encourage us all, again, given that the suicide rate has been gotten quite high right now, if you haven't heard that, given COVID, given this particular moment of adversity, I think it's really useful for us to have these resources. Next is around having some extra resources available. So one example that I wanted to offer here is Cheetah House. And if you haven't heard of Cheetah House, this is a website that was developed from a researcher, Willoughby Britton, outside of Brown University. And it's a nonprofit that is offering resources to meditators in distress. And inside of this, there's actually a whole bunch of different resources around practitioners who have specialty in terms of working with meditators who are in distress, including trauma. There's a number of mental health resources inside of this website, and I found it to be a very helpful and useful resource for people. I'm going to chat this into the box for a moment. I also wanted to lift up the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, where if I'm working with someone who's a person of color who says, I really want to connect with a mental health professional who is queer or trans, there's actually a really powerful network. So let me chat this into the box as well. I see that there are people offering resources in the chat. This is awesome. Thanks, Nancy, for that, and Tracy. Here are the two resources that I just shared. There's the Cheetah House website and also the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. If people have other resources that they have found helpful, thanks, Tyler, for sharing that. If you have resources that you found especially helpful, please include them in the box here. Again, this is trying to be grassroots here of just us sharing resources with each other. But again, this is where being able to offer these extra resources can be really useful. Okay, so just a couple more and then we'll be opening it up. Oh, Benita, thanks for putting that in. Yes, I don't know how to say the ABSP, PSI, Black Psychologists and Black Social Workers Association. Two more pieces I'd like to note here. One is to ally where possible. And by ally, I mean, what is an action or an intervention that we can make that will have someone feel joined with, trusted, and it's a move of unconditional and positive support that really acknowledges the social context of the moment. And there's so many different ways that we can ally with people and have them feel supported. And one of the ways that I've learned this last month, this actually comes from Lori Wong. I don't know, Lori, you might be on the call right now. But Lori made this great point around a certain form of allyship with camera in terms of breakout rooms. So one of the issues that I've seen come up in the last month is in communities, I've gotten questions about this, communities where there's some breakout rooms or there's an issue around differing needs around the visual of having a camera on for Zoom. So I talked about this on the May call, but on one hand, we have the need for privacy or any need that someone does not want to have their camera on, which I totally uplift and support. To me, it's really trauma sensitive that you wouldn't force people to be on camera. And then on the other hand, there are people who will feel unsafe, understandably, if there are people who are on the call, but especially who are in a breakout room who are not on camera. That there's issues of security. I mean, there's deep elements of trauma around state surveillance, which I want to visibilize here, where to not actually be able to see who we're talking to or to be in contact with that person on some level can be challenging or evocative. So how do we handle it? And Lori made this great point that in breakout rooms, one of the options that she's been doing that we've been suggesting is if you go into a breakout room with a smaller group and there's one person in the group who doesn't want to be on video, that one act of allyship could be actually everyone turning their video off so that it equalizes the playing field, so to speak. And so there isn't this creation of an imbalance inside of the group. And people have said this is working really well. So if anyone inside of a smaller breakout room says, you know what, I'd prefer to be off camera, that then anyone else in the group can also be, they can be off camera as well. And it creates a sense of equality there. So that was one example of the allyship. You might be chatting in different examples here of where you've seen that as well. And then just to name one thing about that, and then the difficulty and attention, which we might talk about here, of what do we do when there are those competing needs. So there might be moments where someone says, these fluorescent lights are actually too much and too evocative for me. And then someone says, if we turn the lights off, I'll feel unsafe. So how do we navigate these moments? And we can't be all things to all people. So to me, this is the art project as we move forward of trauma sensitive practice and allyship. And then the final suggestion is around being creative with monitoring. So one of the things I've talked about in trauma sensitive practice, and you've all often asked about, is how would I know? How would I know that someone's struggling with trauma? And how can I actually monitor, kind of a clinical term, but how would I know if there might be someone who's falling through the cracks, who's experiencing traumatic dysregulation? I need to support them, given that I'm on Zoom and I can't see everyone, or I can't track everyone. One of the ways I've seen this working is people using emojis or using the chat. So one thing that you could do is if you're someone who uses a scale of activation, some people use this for, 10 being highly dysregulated, 1 feeling like I feel steady, solid, grounded. You could invite people to chat, where are you right now on a scale of activation? Some of you use the window of tolerance with 5 being in the middle, 10 being hyper aroused, 1 being hypo aroused. You could use that scale. You could also invite people to chat their mood into the chat box. But people are now using emojis, I've also seen. And this is different from the, what are they called? The reactions inside of a chat box where we can, I think the two are a thumbs up and a happy face, I think. I've seen a couple groups that are actually, what they're doing is they're having people, I've seen this often with a couple teens, they're creating small little sticky notes of different emojis so that people can actually show them into the video about how they're doing at a moment when they need to do some kind of check-in. It could be very simple, but again, trying to find creative ways to give people options to non-verbally express how they're doing so that in the moment or later, you can go back and you can actually identify someone like, oh, let me go check in with that person, email them and just say, hey, how are you doing? Can I check in? So those are the practices that I wanted to cover with you. I'll just show them to you one more time. Those are some of the ones that I've been working with, and I am going to pause there, and I'm going to open it up to all of you. Oh, I talked a little bit longer than I planned to, but I want to open up to all of you here and say, what comments do you have? What questions do you have? I'm in it with you. What's working for you? What have you found most challenging? And yeah, really excited just to engage with you here. So you can raise your hand if you like, if you tap the participants tab. And then over on the right-hand side, you can raise your hand. And the first person that came up here, and then Tyler, I'll open up to you. Actually, Tyler, why don't I check in now? Is there anything that you want to lift up in the chat before I open up to questions
Yeah,
and
no,
comments?
Thanks for checking in. Just lots of great resources being shared, and also, many different forms of slight modifications, leaving people in choice, depending on your group. I think it is really important to assess the group, as you were saying, David. And, it may be that, yeah, someone's suggesting like perhaps you can turn away from the screen if you need to not look at the screen, but so folks can see you. Different suggestions like this. So appreciating the nuance that's coming through there.
That's great. That's awesome. I see Bob, and then I see Tashar. I think that's how I pronounce it. But I want to open up to Bob first. Bob, are you here? And if so, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, David. Yeah, thanks. It's Bob Linscott. I'm one of the MBSR teachers, both at UMass and at Brown. And I was so inspired last month with this session on trauma-sensitive Zoom practices. And so it's made me really rethink everything. And I wish you could see my view right now, because I have the same Post-it right up here. So I'm always, it says, look here, right by the
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love that. I love that. But it was just before my class last week, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the night before, I kept thinking about things about what else, what else, and I was thinking about the breakout rooms. And so normally I do breakout rooms in pairs, just because I feel like there's so much an opportunity for really honesty and depth in the pairs. But I thought, like, is that too much? Is that too intense? And so I asked them this time, I said, this week I'm going to put you in groups of 3 and 4, and I'd love you to kind of give me some feedback afterwards, how that was. And they chatted, they put it all in chat, which I actually emailed to you this morning, just so you can take a look at that.
Oh, great, cool.
Phenomenal what they had to say. And a lot of people said it feels very awkward to be face to face, with just one other person, even though they're not total strangers, they're in a class. They really liked the sense of a deeper community with 3 or 4, and the exchange of ideas and looking for kind of common themes. That was really good. I was just surprised by how many people said when it's just 2, it's very awkward. So
Yeah.
I wonder also can be triggering. But I love your analogy this morning about the fluorescent lights. Some lights is too much, and when you turn them down, it's too dark for someone else. Someone else is scared. So the way I'm finding the compromise here is because some people said the honesty is much deeper when it is 2 people. So I feel like I will let them know that there's going to be some breakout rooms during the course of the 8 weeks that are going to be 2, especially the deep listening one, and other ones that are going to be 3 and 4s. But it was interesting to hear their feedback on that.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Bob. Thanks for sharing that and your experiences with it. Thanks for emailing that too. It makes me think of this importance of tailoring it to the group. So it could be a group that's been in for, say, a number of weeks together, where they've developed enough safety and trust and intimacy where the one-to-one could help people go deeper. And then other times where having a larger group, maybe 3 or 4, could actually be more supportive. So I love that differentiation. I've actually been looking for research on this. I'm curious if anyone in the community has this, where in my experience, when we're in person, there is a profound difference in the nervous system between being with someone directly, as Bob, as you're saying, face on, 180 degrees, versus when you're in a group of 3, which creates a 45 degree in a triangle, that there's actually something fundamentally different that happens inside the nervous system. And I think that could be true on Zoom as well. That does create that difference between 180 versus 45 that seems to create more regulation. In my experience over a bunch of years of practice, 3s are so much different than 2s. And I keep looking for research on this to see. I think polyvagal theory has a lot to say about the ways that our nervous system gets activated when we're just right in front of someone. But if any of you have research about that, would love to please send it in, because I think, Bob, you're making a great point. So
I think the woman, one of the women in my course right now is from Duke Law School, is taking it, and they've been doing a lot of research about Zoom to find best practices. And she said her research has been pointing towards 3 and 4 people. And so I'll have her identify those. But it also made me think about, I've heard people say when they're doing FaceTime, when you're holding something like right here, it's so triggering for people, because we don't normally talk like right into someone's face like that.
This is true.
When you are on Zoom and you can step back, it's so much easier, and it's not right there.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Bob. Tyler, that reminds me about one of the things that happens, especially with a group that's larger, that there'll be that period for the first 30 seconds or minute where, if you've randomly assorted people into breakout rooms, it might end up that some people don't opt in, and so there's someone who's alone in a room And then there's others where there's too many. And so one thing we've learned, Tyler, I think this came from you, is to say to people, hey, just so you know, for the next 45 seconds, we may need to do a little bit of shuffling so that we can have the right number of people inside the room. So please don't be surprised if all of a sudden someone joins the room. So just again, giving people the heads up of that little window. Tyler, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, just that if you are creating the breakout rooms yourself, just to remember that for yourself and spend some time monitoring for at least the first minute or two, because sometimes folks will drop out even after they've been in there for a few seconds. So that's just a practice that I have.
Yeah. Oh,
And
there's your cat.
there's my cat.
There's the cat. Shut up. Tashar, are you here? And I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, but
yes, you are.
Can I invite? Hi.
Good. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're providing these valuable resources. So I have two small questions. The first one being, I'm also a qualified MBSR teacher, and most of my participants, they are either therapists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, and I myself I'm a faculty at medical school. However, I'm not a mental health professional. So some psychotherapists that I have who have some background of trauma, I know from the MBSR intake process. And I had interviews with them, and they did tell me that they have depression, trauma, and so on. So to please let them in, not to exclude them. But then what happens during the class is they go in and out and in and out. Their decision making, their attention is so diverted. So I wonder what would be best to do when I have requests from them to please include them in the class. At the same time, making sure that the existing class does not get triggered or disrupted by them. So that was one of the things I was wondering. And
It's such a great question, Tushar. I appreciate it. Do you have any kind of agreements in place that serve kind of as guardrails in the community, so that if someone is kind of pulling away from, as this example that you're using, that feels like it's taking the group off track, are there any kind of community agreements that you can refer to, or is it more open-ended?
According to the MBSR curriculum, I follow their guidelines, and they do sign everything about the requirement to be in the class and to do all the work and so on. Yeah. However, what is being signed and what's being followed is often very different. So yeah. I was wondering what would be the best approach, to be very strict with them, or to say just don't show up. It's very hard for me to navigate between that.
I totally, you're touching on, for some of you have done online training with me, and this is just a huge one around inclusion criteria, that technical term. And when we put up the list of exclusion criteria inside of a program like mindfulness-based stress reduction, when we go through it, almost all of us say, well, that my whole group would be out. And because so many of us struggle with depression, or we have different aspects that would exclude us. And so you're naming I think an important tension point about how do we create a solid container, and how do we make those decisions about who's in the course and not. So I'm with you in it. It feels very dynamic. Here's a thought up top about it, is to be able to name transparently. I think what you said about the fact that someone's disclosing early on in the process is really important. And then just to have an honest conversation with people up front. That's my basic suggestion, is to let people know two things. One, I'm committed to taking care of your needs the best I can. I also have a commitment to taking care of the needs of the entire group. And so inside of that, can we have a conversation about, given what you've disclosed to me, what would need to happen inside the course for it to be beneficial for all of the students, because I need to take care of that as well. So if you can actually identify on the early part of the training what you would need inside of the program for it to be functional and working, and then to make that direct request up front, so that if in session 3 of the course someone says they're inserting themselves in an intense way that's not feeling aligned, that you can actually come back to the original agreement. So to me, it's all the front end work, having the boundaries, but expressing that in a way that feels allying, like you're not shaming anyone, It's that you're trying to take care of the larger container in the group, but it's tricky. It's super tricky inside of it to have those like wearable lines and how do you know? So how does that land?
Yeah, that is definitely very helpful. It makes a lot of sense. I will try some of these suggestions you made. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think the more upfront that you can do, the
Yeah,
better. And then MBSR, we're all working it out. It's very live, we're trying to figure it out. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
A very minor point because people brought up breakout rooms. What are your thoughts on briefly entering different breakout rooms? Because as a facilitator, I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on. What are your thoughts on a facilitator entering breakout rooms briefly to check in?
Such a great question. So if some of you haven't seen this, there is the option as a host that in the breakout rooms, the facilitator can join as a way to, we have that option. I have mixed feelings about it because I see both it can take care of safety or containment of if someone has asked our request to move into the room, but at the same time, all of a sudden you're in a breakout room with 3 people and you're having an intimate conversation and like suddenly here's the teacher and we have the issue of power and authority and compliance. And I think it can really just change the game. So I think of it as just getting very clear with the group about what's going to best support the group. And maybe they want you to pop in because that will support them. But any kind of unsolicited, like, hey, everyone, just thought I'd see what's happening does not seem to go well. Not very trauma sensitive. So
Mm.
yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Tushar. Appreciate you coming on. Tyler, anything that you want to lift up before? There's a great stack of hands here.
So many good questions you all are putting in the chat and asking and continuing to share resources and suggestions. A lot of resonance with your question too, Tushar. I don't know, Dave, if you want to take one of these questions that's come through the chat.
Sure, why don't we do that? And I just want to say, I like to go over 10 minutes today because I talked longer than I thought. So for those of you that can stay on, if you'd like to, I'd like to go over time because I really wanted to engage with you all here. So yeah, Tyler, anything that you want to bring in here?
Sure, great. This is a question from Kelly. And Kelly, if you'd like to come on, you're welcome to, if you're here.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm a teacher. I work with kids.
Oh, Kelly, we're I can't hear you. Can you try talking again? Oh, wait.
Can you hear me now?
We got you now. The mic was getting ruffled. So yeah, we got you now.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
I'm an educator. I work with kids and adults in the mindfulness and education world.
Cool.
So yeah, I just know that the camera is a thing. It affects us. Last time you mentioned to like utilize grounding practices because of the dysregulation of the camera. Even in the past, in years past, when I videoed my classes for various projects and obviously students opted in and I gave them choices or not, I noticed like kids that I'd been working with for years just acted differently. That's just a completely different scenario, but it just shows the impact that a camera has on how we show up in a room. And
Totally.
so aside from like providing choice or naming that it's a thing, I just wondered if you had any other insights on that, because this won't be changing anytime soon. And I'm just looking forward how to really optimize my work, given that camera affects how we can just show up together honestly, I guess, and just be ourselves.
Oh, 100%. I just feel like there's a piece of work here for so many of us of just the shift and really letting the impact of the shift happen both. And for some of us, there's that feeling of loss, like, wow, it really does change, like that student that you just mentioned, the ways that it does change behavior. So I noticed sometimes I want to skip over the impact of actually just being with like, wow, here we are, we're all on Zoom. This is different. Are you talking specifically, by the way, about youth, or are you meaning in general around camera work?
I mean, I think even camera, like I've noticed myself, like I have a group that I meet weekly, like it's a meditation group, and we come off and people are reporting and sharing their experiences. And I just noticed for myself, I just try and get really honest, even for myself, and noticing and what it would be like to share what my process has been and wrestling with that performance aspect. I know, and even in that group, a lot of the people I know personally, like I've been on retreats with them, just trying to get really honest and so trying to bring that maybe to you're in this call. I feel like you're providing a lot of solutions, and maybe it's just naming it and creating agreements and creating safety and but I think it's unavoidable that it's a part of the process of being on video.
Absolutely. Yeah, to me, it makes me think of the fact that we're in an experiment that has not been collectively done in terms of this amount of video. I mean, some of you might have been online this much, but for so many, it's new. And so week to week, I feel like it is changing, and it's not like we have it figured out. And that's partly why we wanted to do part 2 of this is, as you're saying, I think, Kelly, like inviting honesty inside the group of how this is for people, continuing to monitor and check in. And I have to say that there's a couple groups that I've been tracking and working with who they're experimenting with, they're doing experiments inside the community. So they're doing one session where they're like, let's all go off screen, everyone, and let's just see how that feels. And then other sessions where we're going to be present with each other, and we're actually going to purposefully, as a meditation practice, just take each other in for a moment in the present moment. That seems like this group has just been doing the experiments. That's been really helpful for them as well. But then I think that you're speaking to it, just the importance of like inviting people to be with the impact of what's here, which that's why I wanted to start with the activation trauma, was to say, this is traumatic for a lot of people, or can be, or it's evoking intense adversity. So I'm with you. I'm with you inside of it. Maybe we could just keep in touch around it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Tyler, you want me to move to can I move to a couple more hands here?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I see, is it Raina? Rain is here, and then I see
It's Rana.
Roger. Rana?
Yeah, hi, how are
Hi,
you?
Rana.
I actually met you at the mindfulness conference at Omega 2 years ago.
Oh, wow, okay, nice to
Yeah.
see you.
So I've been staying, in touch through your emails. And I wanted to share, there was a meditation you did about creating a boundary for yourself. I don't know if it was in May or June. Maybe, I think it was May. But I just wanted to share that I actually used that meditation to talk about trauma and racism, and did the meditation. And so far I had 60,000 views. So I just wanted to thank you
Wow.
for that. It was really, really helpful. A lot of people have really gotten some good responses from it, and just wanted to, just thank you for continuing to do the work that you do and for sharing it with everyone.
That's awesome, Rana. Hey, Rana, can you chat that, or like let us see how can we find it?
Oh, okay, I'll put it on my
You open to
Facebook.
that? I'd love to see it.
Sure. Yeah.
And can you describe it for when you say it's the boundary? Do you mind just sharing what it was? Or?
The one where you talked about how you hook your thumb into your navel and then you center your body, and then it was the front and the back, the spine, and then you had the shoulders, hips, and feet. That one. Is there a specific name for that? We
usually call it a centering meditation. I learned it inside of a group called Generative Somatics. And I that can be helpful for people, especially in this moment, to find those different dimensions of the body. So yeah, if you could put that into the chat, it'd be
definitely
great. We'll check it out. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for your work. Good to see you. Roger, I see you here. Do you want to come on?
Sure. Hi, David.
Hey.
I've been teaching online mindfulness classes for about 5 or 6 years. And when I do it in the way I normally teach a live in-person class, where I close my eyes. That's how I tend to meditate. I notice that when you teach or lead the practices here, you're gazing right into the camera during all of that. So I'm wondering, is there a rationale for that for you, or is that something that's a best practices technique that is helpful?
I'm doing that in part. You mean during the meditations?
That's correct.
I'm doing that in part because I want to keep monitoring what's happening in the group. So I had done that a couple times where I would close my eyes and lead, which actually I find easier. But I did find it to be an important practice to just stay present, because when I'm still connecting to the camera, I can still see some video and faces below. And a couple times I had it once where I had my eyes closed, and it wasn't until after that I found out like my mic had gone off and that people were trying to get my attention. So to me, it's just keeping some presence with the group, but I do find it challenging to be able to do that. So
right. So if you're leading a longer practice, say 20, 25, 30 minutes or something, is that something that you'd advise to continue that eye contact, or is that?
Interesting.
optional. Or,
I'm curious what you do. I notice if I'm leading a longer practice, I'll actually invite us all to turn off our videos so that like my camera's off, all the cameras are off, and then it just becomes auditory. That's one thing I've done for longer practices.
and
Yeah.
I'm using 2 monitors, and down here's my laptop, up here's the monitor. And I have my chat on the lower screen. So when I'm sitting like this, it may appear like my eyes are closed, but I can still watch the chat and monitor
Oh,
people
great.
on and off too.
That's
Okay,
awesome.
just curious if there was a rationale. Thanks a lot. Good
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. No, thanks for
I love it.
asking.
Is that a new mic, by the way? That's a great mic.
Oh, is it there? Oh, it's in the picture. I didn't see it. Yes. People weren't hearing me. So yes,
No, it sounds
I have
great.
a mic
Love
here
it.
now. So
Good job. Thanks.
I feel very fancy. Thanks. Thanks, Roger. I see Lindsay. Lindsay, do you want to come on? We'll be here for a couple more minutes and then we'll close together as a group. And by the way, we're at 10. So if you need to close here, thank you for being here and want to keep going a little bit over time. So Lindsay, are you here? And if so, can you lower your hand?
Yeah. Oh.
Or sorry, unmute yourself.
Okay. So thank you. I have a strategy question. I really appreciated the suggestion to have a protocol in place. And I recently started a community mindfulness group on Zoom. And the community mindfulness group, I don't always know all of the people. They're coming from a large newsletter list with about 1,300 people on it. And I have, 10, 15 regulars, and then some other people that will come in. I think that idea of having a protocol in place is really important. And I'm not sure how to set that up with people I don't know. And I don't necessarily have their emails. I just would love any thoughts around.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. My first thought on it is that's just the scope that we can't always. It's always that gauge of what we can hold and monitor and who we can't. I wonder, what do you think of chatting your email or an email at the beginning of a session to let people know if you have any questions, concerns about the practice, you can get a hold of me here. So letting people at least know, like a lighthouse, that they can get in touch with you, as opposed to you needing, if you can't track everyone, you can't track everyone. That's my first thought about making sure, as long as people know that they can get a hold of you, that's a kind of trauma sensitive practice. How does that sound?
That sounds like a great idea. I will definitely start doing that.
Cool. Yeah, I think covering our bases there is
Yeah.
really important. Yeah. Thanks for the question and your work. Yeah. I see Ernesto, and we'll take maybe a couple more, and then Tyler, I'll turn it back to you. But Ernesto, are you here, and do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you.
I was just going to say something very simple, but that in my experience I've observed in the last couple of weeks, which is to kind of play an experiment with the screen lighting from your monitor and the volume. Actually, I've seen myself kind of more grounded and more relaxed and more able to take in the different views from the different screens from everyone or the images when it's not so bright in my computer. And so I've experimented with that, and it's a big difference. And still I'm looking at you, but I'm not feeling so activated, and my eyes, many people might be experiencing this, can be hurting with all the hours in the computer. So it's kind of relaxing and more soothing to have less light, and also to not have the volume at the top, and I just been paying attention to that, and it makes a big difference. So I just wanted to share that to people to try it or offer it as options,
I love that. I'm going to try that.
And it's
It
very
is
simple.
The brightness of the screen is very intoxicating, isn't it? It draws us in. My friend just offered a challenge about, some of you might have seen on your phones, there's an option for those of you that have smartphones. You can turn it to black and white as opposed to having it be in color, which does make it less, I do find that I'm more present with myself as opposed to when it's color. So that's great, Ernesto, and the volume as well.
I think someone was saying something around, obviously this is not the same as when you are with a person in a, outside of the online environment, but in a actual space together. and you are not looking like with your whole eyes open, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's something about the screen that brings you in that mood when there's too much light. So I just feel like my eyes are a lot sort of more relaxed and present, but it's still more relaxed for myself when there's not so much light.
That's great, which sounds
Yeah.
very supportive of offering contemplative practice, which I know you do. So thanks, Ernesto. That's great. Tyler, anything that you want to highlight in the chat? And I'll take maybe one more person and then we'll close.
Sure, yeah. So much going on in the chat. It's quite dynamic. Appreciate you all. A lot of appreciation for what everyone's sharing.
Can I interrupt? That is one thing I have to say for those of you, like, that's one thing a little strange, as you might find that in not monitoring the chat, I'm like, well, I have no idea what's actually happening. There could be a whole thread in conversation. So I find that often a little strange. I'm still getting used to it. But yes, sorry, Tyler, what's going on?
No, it definitely helps to have another person monitoring. There have been a few things coming up in different sort of contexts from folks around intake, and especially, you know, assessing for trauma, or perhaps just generally feeling into how the group is going to come together, which, you know, can inform how you may want to set community agreements, and how you may want to set up the Zoom calls, right? So I don't know if there's anything you want to speak to that specifically.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a huge topic. Every one of you will be in different contexts. You know, Bob, I'm thinking of you earlier, like you'll have a particular frame or an MBSR, all the different, Kelly, you were talking about, you know, working with youth. And so there's different questions that we can or can't ask. And then in terms of the structures and the organizations that we're with, I don't necessarily recommend asking people to disclose trauma inside of an intake form, especially if you don't know them. But it is useful to try to find questions and terms that help people disclose if they're currently experiencing some form of dysregulation or traumatic stress. So I forget, someone might have to chat this in the box. I have a sentence that I forget, we might need to put it in the email, of a way that you can say, is there anything that you'd want me to know right now about adversity that you're facing? Or something to that degree that's neutral enough that you're giving people an invitation to share if they're experiencing heightened traumatic symptoms, or anything that you want me to know as you're entering in. So it could be something like, the practices that we're doing are powerful and can be evocative. Is there anything that you'd like me to know about your current emotional state that would help me best support you inside of this work? Just again, you're giving people the invite. And then of course, inside of that, if you're leading groups, or even with an individual, you never know. It could be 3 weeks into working with someone, and then all of a sudden we bump into trauma. We can never know, but we do the best we can. Tashar, as you were talking about earlier, like we have these conversations up front. So it's a huge topic around inclusion and exclusion criteria, but I'd invite you to just be purposeful about it inside your work. Tyler, anything you want to add to that?
I think that's great. And yeah, just to say on a slightly different note, just to settle folks, and also like just setting certain containers. So like, for example, there's been some asks to send out the chat, which I think we could do because so many folks have shared their various resources around this. So just so you know, to settle us all for the rest of the call here, we'll send that out.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading over it. So, well, we're close to time. I see, Karen, you've had your hand up for a long time, so I can only really take a comment if it's a big question, but I probably can't do it. But Karen, if you want to unmute yourself, just invite you for this last moment, and then we're going to need to close.
Yeah, this is more of a question, and it might just need more time, but
Sure.
I work with teens and self-compassion. We have a self-compassion program. And so I just had some questions around, first of all, video on, video off. We have been strongly encouraging them to keep the video on, simply because we feel that the other teens would, I think if you gave teens the choice, everybody would have the video off, and yet that, as you know, makes it harder for them to bond, and this is what they need more than anything. And so I had questions about that, and then also about breakout rooms. And
you know, one thing we could do is there's a number of people in the community that work with teens, and there's just, I think, just some different questions around brain development and how we can actually best ally with teens in this moment. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some homework and seeing if there's someone, there's a number of professionals who would, or specialists who would like to come on and probably field questions around youth. So let me do a little bit of homework and see if we could bring someone on who can actually take a deep dive into youth, because I find teens, I love teens. Well, I don't love teens. It's, I don't, teens are, when people ask questions about youth, I'm like, wow, this is a really important question. And it's such a unique terrain, not unique terrain.
Yeah, I have, I have a lot of background in the area. I'm a professor at university and work with individual development, child development, but on Zoom and with trauma, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing that, like, whoa, we're in a, and then the adversity happening in a home environment and how to work with that skillfully and disclosures. Right. And so there's a whole piece here that I'd like to dig in. So why don't we, if we could put a pin in that and say, let's keep talking about it. That'd be great. Thanks for your work, bringing that in. Yeah. Well, friends, we're going to end here. Thanks for those of you that came and hung out a little bit longer. Tyler, anything you want to share here as we move towards closure?
No, just thanks to all of you for being with such a dynamic conversation, and yeah, hope to see you next time.
Thanks, Tyler. So we will send out a link to this recording. You'll also get the chat, and there'll also be a link to the handouts that I showed earlier if you'd like to look at them. And for those of you that want to hang around for some breakout rooms, we'll have them open for about 20 minutes. If you'd like to meet a couple people in the community, we're going to do that. Otherwise, I just invite you to take a brief pause here before we close, with your eyes open or your eyes closed. And just a couple of intentional and purposeful breaths before we shift to whatever is next in your day, whether you're staying here or moving on to something else. Just taking a moment with all that got evoked here, learning, the questions, and just taking this moment with yourself to kind of recenter. Okay. Thanks, everyone. It's so awesome to be with you. Great to see your faces. We can unmute ourselves. And if you'd like to stick around for the Zoom groups, please do that. And we'll get those going in about a minute. But otherwise, you can unmute yourself and we can say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to all
very much.
Bye.
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 Have a nice day.
Everyone. Thank you.